Good morning and welcome to the final day of our inaugural Ignite series showcasing the game-changing technologies and innovations that are transforming how we view real estate and investment opportunities. Today's program will take a closer look at the tech and innovations transforming urban lifestyles, how it's revamping retail and hospitality, and giving rise to the next generation of smart cities. It has become abundantly clear that technology is changing everything about the way we live, work, and operate, as technology takes an increasingly important role in shaping the future of commercial real estate. We at Commercial Observer have invested in expanding our tech coverage. We look forward to delivering new tech products and services to you all. Keep a lookout for our new PropTech newsletter, which debuted this week. And if you have any introduction or stories in the tech space, you can contact Phil Russo, who has joined our editorial team as special correspondent for PropTech. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our 2021 Ignite sponsors, Cadre, Camber Creek, Sherry, Eden Health, Fried Frank, HQO, International Well Building Institute, Placer.ai, STO Building Group, and thank you to today's association partners, GNYCUC, NYC Builds BioPlus, and Women in PropTech. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees will be muted throughout the event, but we encourage you to submit any questions you may have for the speakers throughout today's program. You can do this by entering them into the Q&A box in your control panel. The moderators will reserve time at the end of each panel to address as many questions as possible. And if you're looking to connect with today's speakers, let us know. You'll receive a live poll at the conclusion of each panel asking if you'd like to connect. We'll pass along your contact information to any and all speakers that you select. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel, Designing Better Tenant Experiences Within Their Hybrid Workplaces, excuse me. And I'll turn things over to our moderator, Tom Acatelli, the co-deputy editor of Commercial Observer. Tom?
Thanks, Max. Welcome, everyone. Matt McCambridge and Suzette McKinney, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. So I just wanted to start, if you could quickly introduce yourself to the audience, one at a time. Suzette, you want to go first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Suzette McKinney. I currently serve as Principal and Director of Life Sciences for Sterling Bay in Chicago.
I'm Matt McCambridge. I'm the co-founder and the CEO at Eden Health, which I suspect we'll talk a little bit more about.
Right. So the title of this particular panel is Designing Better Tenant Experiences Within Hybrid Workplaces. So we're going to focus a lot on health and healthfulness in offices. And we actually, earlier in the forum this week, had a poll, and one of the top 4 draws for getting people back into the conventional office, hybrid or otherwise, was that it was going to be healthy. I mean, other things had to do with, dear God, make my commute better, something like that. But health was right up there as one of the top 4 reasons, top 4 ways to draw employees back. So I wanted to just start with, what sort of demand is there for healthier workplaces compared with before the pandemic, and even a few years before that?
So sure, Tom, thanks for the question. I'd be happy to start. I think there is significant demand now that, we've experienced the pandemic and nearly a year and a half later are still trying to come out of the pandemic. I think that prior to the pandemic, no one really paid attention to public health, certainly in the workplace, unless you specifically worked in public health or specifically worked in healthcare. I think most people just took public health and public health measures for granted. And didn't think much about them. But I think with the onset of the pandemic, most Americans had never experienced the pandemic before. And, it wasn't just any old pandemic, it was one of epic proportions almost. And so I think now it sort of forced the issue and the issue of public health onto us as a society. And I think most people are really afraid. Many are really afraid that going back into the workplace could put them at risk. And so I think that that's what's driving the majority of the demand for workplaces to be healthy in the future.
Matt?
Yeah, so maybe to contextualize my answer a bit, to give you a quick sense of Eden, we're a healthcare company and we work with landlords, we work with tenants to provide dedicated access to on-site healthcare. So that's primary care, mental health, physical therapy, also navigation of care. And then that's supported with 24/7 access, which is nationwide for folks as well to really extend that service. So when we were beginning, coming the pandemic, that was our business model. We were already doing all that kinds of care. What we saw was companies really recognizing that they're in the healthcare business now, as long as they have people who are coming into their office. They're responsible for the safety of their people who are coming in. They're being held accountable by their employees. They're being kind of accountable by cities and other regulators. And so I think that, that there's been just a rising to the consciousness level of saying that if you operate a physical space in some way, shape, or form, you're in the healthcare business. And then I think the other side is you've got a pull from individuals. I think Suzette was really right when she was talking about how scared people are about returning to the space. And now you've got the rise of certain types of variants like the Delta variant. And that's added something that, some people thought we were done with the pandemic. And I was hopeful about that too, but it's looking like that's not the case. And so from an individual coming back into a space, really having a firm grip, having access to information, to medical professionals, to support maybe on the mental health side as well, I think is really, really important. So we're really seeing it from tenants, well, obviously from landlords, but then also from the individuals themselves entering back into buildings and workspaces.
Okay, I was going to ask about demand, where it's coming from. Are there particular industries where you're seeing more demand, particular fields or particular types of buildings?
On our end, we really are seeing it kind of across the spectrum in industries, as well as sizes of companies. I mean, even if you're a small company relative to a massive company, you still got people who are participating in this experience in a similar way. So I think it's all over the place. I do think that smaller and medium-sized companies need more support because maybe they don't have an in-house medical resource, or if you're a smaller company, you're just going to be a little bit more stretched thin. So I do think that they need a little bit more support, but I think it's kind of hitting everybody. As far as our focus is, when we have permanent physical assets, we really focus on larger buildings, 1,000 plus, 2,000 plus. When we deploy a virtual offering for folks, that's kind of everywhere. So that's sort of how I approached it from what's going on, depending on.
I would agree with that as well. I think at this point, no matter what size the company is, everyone is struggling to try and understand what the public health messages are that they need to be following, what types of policies should they be putting in place. I think the largest debate that I'm hearing is whether or not employers should demand that their employees get vaccinated. So to Matt's point, I think demand is across the board. And again, public health was something that most people didn't pay very much attention to prior to the pandemic. And so everyone is grasping for information. And there's a lot of confusion out there as well in terms of what's the right information, what's the right recommendations that I should be following for my company and implementing for my employees.
Now, Eden and Sterling had a partnership in Chicago, correct?
Correct.
Can you guys take me through the process there and how that went, how it came together, and how it's going?
Sure. Matt, why don't you take that?
All right, I'm happy to start. So we're building. So we've brought healthcare and are bringing it to a variety of Sterling Bay buildings. We've already announced 111 North Canal and the West Loop, and 600 West Chicago and River East, and there's others that are coming. And when we were looking to partner with somebody who was really forward thinking in terms of how they build their buildings already. So, if you look back before the pandemic, Sterling Bay, we really think was out in the top pack in terms of making sure that their organization was providing everything they needed to for their tenants. And so we thought they were a great partner for us when we saw really healthcare being a must-have amenity for the work site. So we're extremely excited about partnering with them. And then what it ultimately means on behalf of the tenants is that everybody's going to have access to trusted clinicians. They can even get their primary care there, their physical therapy there. They can talk to therapists. And that's going to also then follow them home. So I think one interesting area is as you think about your amenitization of your physical space, how do you stay relevant to that person no matter where they are? So with the Eden model, not only do you have access in the building, but your tenants and their families have access wherever they go, whether that's to their home, on vacation, on business trips. And so we want to make sure that we're helping the landlord always stay relevant to that individual, even in a remote working environment.
Mhm.
And I would just add, from the Sterling Bay side, we really pride ourselves on our properties being highly amenitized. And so we are constantly challenging ourselves to make sure that we're bringing the best amenities and the most in-demand amenities to our properties for our tenants and our employees as well. And so with this increased focus on health and healthcare and safety within the workplace, I think our partnership with Eden Health is a perfect match.
How do you get the word out? I'm curious. You have these amenities, you have these services for tenants and their employees. How do you get the word out? Is it just signage? Is it social media? What do you do?
Well, we take a multifaceted approach to getting the word out. Obviously, yes, there's signage. Once we get these facilities opened where Eden will establish a presence, you'll be able to see that, in the lobbies. But we use social media. We use our marketing channels, multiple lists. We notify not just our tenants, but our leasing team is informing potential tenants, but we also notify our partners, our stakeholders, and our investors as well. So we rely heavily on social media and other marketing channels, but also just word of mouth and reputation.
Okay. And can we get back to sort of some of the more in-demand elements as far as healthful offices, healthcare on site? What are some must-haves and what are the challenges? What are the rewards of having them?
I think.
Matt? Oh, go ahead, Suzette. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, well, yeah, sure. So I think that, one thing that when we, in the midst of the pandemic, and I know we kind of focus on that a little bit at the beginning, we can get a little doom and gloom, but I think that the idea is that this is really something you can implement for the future, because take the opportunity now to really invest in health, and that's going to return in value many-fold over. So what you can do is you can have people kind of change their ability to access services in a much more seamless way with higher quality care and things that they never have access to before. So in your building, one thing we see, physical therapy, people love having access to that. I mean, honestly, everybody's got kind of aches and pains, especially if you're sitting in an office for a long period of time. And so if you're able to go take care of that in a location at the site, or, for us, we also offer it virtually, that's huge. It's a huge benefit. So that's one thing we're definitely seeing. On the mental health side, I think that what the pandemic has done is it's sort of broken open a bit of a taboo around that. And so people are talking about it more. They understand that, if they've got anxiety or depression or something is being exacerbated due to what's going on, they can talk to somebody. I think that's a really important thing to carry into the future. I mean, we're seeing so many employers figure out what is our offering there really, because they know through their regular insurance model, maybe it's not always the easiest to access those. So we're seeing mental health being a really big component. And then I think another couple pieces not to really be discounted would be just what ties that together. How do you provide a resource so that people can know what the quality of, or rather know how to navigate the system and get access to the right information. So we really emphasize even just basic medical services, your annual physical, that kind of thing, but also navigation. So when you have a question about it, and you say, oh, my knee hurts, I don't know where I go, or is it covered by my insurance? You can kind of go to one place for a resource and just make it easy. So the underlying theme is simplicity, but I wanted to highlight a few of the different kind of actual offerings themselves that people are finding really valuable.
Suzette?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Matt just said, but I think the other thing that's really becoming important, especially in office buildings as companies and employers begin to return their employees to work, are other obvious, I guess I would just broadly call them safety measures. And those are things like very low touch systems, whether those are systems for accessing elevators within buildings, or, for example, in our building, even the water machine. It works very much like, you scan the barcode to dispense water into your cup, as opposed to touching it with your hands. So we're seeing a lot of demand for, again, very low touch systems to give a greater sense of security, if you will, from a healthcare perspective, and things that just surfaces that would promote the spread of disease and things like that. So I think those are other options that we're beginning to see as well.
So you said beginning to see, were any of these sort of inevitable or in play before the pandemic, or as much of this is for both of you, is much of this a result of the pandemic?
No, from a personal experience, I've seen many of those types of things, certainly with elevators, minimal touch for elevator buttons and things like that prior to the pandemic. But I think since we've been through the pandemic, those types of basic measures are becoming increasingly important. You may walk into a building and, you might see people using a towel to press a button, or using, the sleeve of their jacket or their shirt, because they don't want to touch it with their hands. And so, again, those types of touchless or low touch systems are becoming increasingly important. Personally, I don't see us going back to, the old way where everything was very high touch.
Yeah, and on the medical side, we already had partnerships with a variety of landlords and commercial real estate entities, such as Convene, where all Convene members have Eden Health membership. Also with Connell Real Estate in New Jersey and some other organizations. But we've seen candidly, we've seen an acceleration on this with regard to landlords. And I think that I think this was going to be a slower change without the pandemic, but now the floodgates have really opened, and we're making several other announcements, both in Chicago, but also in other cities, where we're really seeing landlords kind of saying, I have to have a position on healthcare. And the interesting thing actually about healthcare is, in terms of providing an amenity at the work site, is it's actually really a small investment, relatively speaking. So if you've got a gym, right? Those gyms typically have to be somewhat big, and they can be costly because they have to be kind of more premier space. And so on our end, if you've got 1,000 or 1,500 square feet, you can put a site there that can service your entire building. And you can also extend that from a virtual standpoint too. So I think as we sort of look at how the workplace is changing and adding more elements that make sense in a hybrid context, I think we're going to be reading about space and physical needs. If you can.
Matt, I think you froze.
Suzette, you can hear me? Too. Okay. I can hear you, yes.
I wanted to ask, how receptive are tenants to these services? Like, is this something that's asked, up front, or asked about up front, or, is it, how far back in the pack as far as requests or demand does it go? How in demand is it among tenants?
Sure. I think it's in high demand. I think, as we are continuing to talk to prospective tenants coming into some of our buildings, everyone wants to know what the systems are that have been put in place. Everyone also wants to know, separate and aside from a healthcare perspective, in terms of measures that have been put in place, people also want to know what types of environmental standards are we implementing into our buildings and our facilities. So at this point, it's something that's in high demand. I think across the board, employers are experiencing challenges with their workforce and also with their talent pipelines, because as companies continue to work to try and attract new talent, young talent, the highly educated talent, they are being met with questions about health and safety standards, the ability to have a hybrid work environment, and talent, young people especially, are becoming increasingly concerned about what their employers are doing to ensure health and safety within the workplace.
Right, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, the millennials make up the biggest cohort, I think, of working Americans right now. So
that's right.
Can we talk a little bit about, how easy or difficult it is for a landlord to integrate a healthcare amenity into a property?
I think for us, I can only speak for us at Sterling Bay. Again, we are always endeavoring to try and make sure that we are delivering the best amenities to our tenants. For us, it wasn't very difficult at all, especially if you in commercial real estate, when you look at commercial office properties. Oh, and Matt's back.
My internet just made a great case for going back to the office, I think.
There you go.
But, most commercial office buildings have amenity spaces, retail spaces in their ground floors anyway. So from a perspective of how easy it was to integrate an amenity such as Eden Health within our facilities, it wasn't very difficult at all. You have the space. I think it's just a matter, and Matt can attest to this, it's just a matter of working with the company to figure out what their space needs are and any specifications that need to be built into that space, but not something that was extremely difficult.
Yeah, Matt, we were just talking about how you work in a healthcare amenity to a property, and what the challenges are, whether it's easy or difficult.
Yeah. I'm not sure where I cut out before, but I'm not going to recap the whole thing. But just from a space size standpoint, we're talking about 1,000, 1,500 square feet, and so when we go look at what a landlord is looking to accomplish, the question is, where in the building do you want it to be? Most people are opting for central places. Most people are opting for before you're starting to enter the elevator bank, or before you're getting to a gated location, but you could also be deep in the building. We have several of those as well. So the question is, where do you want that experience to be? And then the other question is, what do you want your experience of your tenants to be? So we see some landlords looking to say, we're actually going to cover this fully. Everybody's going to have membership to Eden, and we're going to, basically fully available to all of the individuals and their families. And they're looking for some people who are looking to have sort of an incremental experience where somebody would opt into a membership. And it's just what you want your tenant population to be like. That second case would be a little bit maybe more like a gym that you're opting into. So the first question is really that space consideration. And the second question is, how do you want to be communicating this and marketing this to your tenants? But from a simplicity standpoint, we're opening these spaces in 3 to 6 months.
Okay. I was going to ask that as far as the timeline. And I wanted to ask, how much of demand is contingent upon people returning to the office in large number?
That's a good question. What we've seen is, and we work with landlords who are really investing for the next decade plus, right? And so we're not seeing people who are in the short-term model. So I think we all think there's going to be substantial return to the office, but it's part of the reason why virtual is such a huge part of our model. It's actually about 60% of all of our clinical encounters. And so even if you're in a hybrid environment where people are coming in 2 days a week, 3 days a week, they're probably going to be coming in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And so they're going to be grouping around those times. They can have access to the sites when they're in the office and can get that in-person experience, but they can actually get access to the exact same team virtually as well. They can actually get access to the exact same team virtually, even when they're not in the office space as well.
And then, I'm sorry, Tom, but
no, go ahead.
Matt, you had also mentioned earlier that, the service is also extended to family members. And so,
right.
You want to reiterate that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part is great because, for the individual, it's important for them to be able to take care of their health for the whole family. But then the other part that's really relevant is I think when you're dealing with things like COVID, where you can actually, transmit to your family, giving that access to everybody and making sure that they're feeling comfortable and they're feeling supported and they're feeling safe is important. But I think that, especially in a hybrid environment, when your home is also your office and then your office as well as your second office, I think that bringing your family into that experience is important.
Yeah. And so, Tom, just as a matter of note, I asked Matt to reiterate that because, I think what we're seeing nowadays is that employees are not just concerned about themselves, they're concerned about their families as well. So when we're talking about healthcare as an amenity in the workplace, the fact that specifically this partnership between Sterling Bay and Eden Health, it enables employees to have a level of assurance that their families are going to be considered in that amenity as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I wanted to ask, so basically the hybrid model works with this because you have, telemedicine, you basically have telehealth, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think telehealth is, I think we should be demystified a little bit because it's really just talking to your doctor in a different way. It's the same way we don't think about like movies, it's not e-watching movies anymore. You've got Netflix and that's how you watch your movies at this point. Mm-hmm. So from a telemedicine standpoint, what's really important is who's on the other end of the line. And so for us, we actually employ all of our clinicians full-time virtually. Most cases, you're using a virtual-only service. They really only work 3 to 5 hours a week in that virtual format. But for us, they're only seeing our patients. And so that's what allows you to extend it. It's actually really nice. I mean, especially think about mental health. Think about seeing your therapist. Being able to do that in a space that is convenient and safe for you is really the key. So whether that's in the physical space, which can be a good experience for folks, or maybe you want it to be in your home at a different time. And so providing that flexibility to meet whatever the patient wants to experience, it also works really well with regard to the flexible office space. And that's kind of what we're thinking about. How do you give people a menu of options that's going to fit their particular circumstances?
We only have about 2 minutes left. Suzette, I wanted to ask, so Sterling adopted a hybrid workplace model, right? How'd that go?
We did. Well, during the time that we adopted the model, I think it actually went very well. We split our staff into 2 groups. And so each of those 2 groups had alternating days in which they came into the office. And even for the times that each of the groups were in the office, we had a policy around masking and physical distancing and, the other public health measures that were being recommended by public health officials at the time. Mm-hmm. We've reached a point now where we are returning to the office. We have now passed our full return to the office day. And so, we continue to monitor the recommendations from public health officials, but so far it's going well.
Right. We don't have any audience questions, and we only have a minute. But I just wonder, what questions do you guys get in relation to this most often? Just very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I get is how many people are going to use it. And I just think that's really relevant. So what we see across our book of business is out of every 100 employees who have access, we see 70 register in the first year and 60 have a completed clinical encounter with us. And that completed clinical encounter is typically very substantial. So we think it's a great amenity that really people are using at an extremely high rate, compared to gyms, multiple times really the rate they use that.
Yeah, and I think the question that I'm getting most often is, do you really think that return to work is a thing? And my response is, yes, I do. And honestly, I think the question, well, it comes from everyone, but I get a lot of questions from, real estate brokers. Do you really think companies are going to go back into the office full time? And honestly, yes, I do. But I think that there are also several industries that thrive and excel when they can be in person and can conduct their businesses in person, which is why I think an amenity such as a healthcare amenity in the workplace setting is something that's going to be a move into the future. As Matt said earlier, we're designing for the future. We're designing for decades out.
Right. It's a very good point, and a great point to end on. Suzette McKinney and Matt McCambridge, thank you very much for joining us for this first panel of the day.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great panel. Matt, Suzette, Tom, loved it. And now we will be having our next panel of the day, tech-infused mixed-use developments, keeping cities competitive, moderated by Phil Russo, our special correspondent for PropTech, Commercial Observer, with Nikki Greenberg, founder of the Real Estate of the Future, and Faye Penn, whom I have known for a very long time, back when we both worked at the New York Post and at Observer, the Senior Vice President of Initiatives for NYC EDC.
Hello, good morning, Max. And as he leaves, good morning to Nikki Greenberg and Faye Penn. Thank you for joining us. I am not seeing myself on screen, which is probably a good thing, but I can see both of you. Can you see me? Great.
Yes.
Now here we are. Very nice. Let me quickly introduce our two guests who are joining us today. First, Nikki Greenberg, founder, Real Estate of the Future, originally an architect and real estate developer. Nikki is a globally known innovation strategist and thought leader, and she leads the Technology and Innovation Council for ULI of New York City. So welcome, Nikki. Faye is a senior VP of initiatives at New York City EDC, a former Brooklyn small business owner. Faye is dedicated to helping women as they succeed in their careers and businesses through an array of initiatives and programs that are innovative with EDC. So welcome, Faye, as well. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the visionary and the more practical aspects of technology in cities, both of which you know from your respective perspectives. So given that, let me ask both of you to begin with. As COVID raged, we heard the usual stuff about the death of cities. Obviously, that was nonsense. However, cities will undoubtedly continue to evolve post-pandemic. So what do each of you see as the top three components of New York City and other major cities, if you will, in the near future? What are they going to look like technologically? We can start with whomever.
I may as well start, if you don't mind. Firstly, thank you everyone for joining in, and pleasure to meet you virtually, Faye, and see you again, Phil, for this very interesting and important topic. So the future of cities, are they here to stay? We know they're here to stay. You can see that beautiful skyline behind me in my Zoom photo. They're addictive. They're absolutely addictive. There's a buzz and there's a vibrancy, and they're not going away in any way, shape, or form. I was asked to give, 3 high-level bullet points on why that might be, and I'll tell you what I think they are. Firstly, convenience. When you walk out of your door in Manhattan, you can get everything you want whenever you want. And once you become used to that, it's a very different thing to go somewhere else where you feel like dare I say, almost like a second-class citizen, even in terms of, the digital technology. In New York, not only can we find every single store that you need, but even Amazon delivers everything that you need. That doesn't happen everywhere. It's quite special to have that convenience. The second thing I'd say is also around efficiency. This is the purpose of cities, that by having density is that they operate more efficiently. You're not having to travel big distances, you're not having to commute, but at the same time, you have that access to the best in class because you get to have these shared facilities. So these shared facilities become better and better and better. Again, you don't get that everywhere. And then the third point I'd like to make is also around innovation. Cities have always driven, smart people, and smart people coming together in person tends to brew up ideas. This isn't something that's new. This isn't something that's unique to New York. It's something that just has happened over time, and that will continue to happen. The thing is about, cities, we've seen globally, there's always been a move to urbanization for hundreds of years. Cities become denser and busier and, more hectic. And people do give up their lives and lifestyles of having backyards, or in my case, going from Sydney, Australia, which is paradise, to to the chaos of New York, because it's worth it at the end of the day. So in no way are they going away, but it's always exciting to see how cities are going to evolve.
Thank you. I think that was a sort of sly shot at New York City and compared to Sydney, but we'll let it go for today. Faye, do you have something to add?
Oh, I absolutely do. Phil, Max, thank you for hosting today. Nikki, I love what you have to say, especially the people, right? We have the most incredible talent in New York City, the most diverse talent. People who come here really know how to hustle. And I think that right now we are really hustling as a city. We're not taking anything for granted. Your question, Phil, was three things, right? There's so many reasons why we believe that New York City will emerge stronger, but I'm just going to talk about a few of them. One thing is public health, and that is being covered as part of our life sciences initiative. We can't have economic health without public health. And New York City is investing $1 billion in life sciences, which is geared toward business attraction, R&D, making sure that New York City is a top destination for the life sciences industry when they're thinking about where to locate and grow their companies. I want to talk about a piece of that, which is the pandemic response lab, which is something that we set up early on to track, to do research, to figure out how to stay ahead on the pandemic research, especially through COVID-19 right now. I want to talk just personally for a minute about an experience I had in another state. A few weeks ago, I tried to get a COVID test. It was a Sunday, and it was so difficult to find a COVID test. I had a car. I had the whole day ahead of me, and I had to make an appointment for Monday at the local drugstore, and the results wouldn't come for 3 days. Just as an example of how New York does things differently. I don't know if other folks here have had that experience, but early on, we said we have to get people tests and we have to get the results faster. So I had colleagues at EDC who became nasal swab experts in figuring out how to make nasal swabs locally, so that all of these manufacturers that were doing other things suddenly became pandemic response suppliers. So, and we got COVID tests results. We set up a facility to process those tests much more quickly, so that when you go to, I live in Brooklyn, I can walk out, I can go to 5 different places within walking distance to get tested, and I'll get those results within 3 hours often. We promise 24 hours, but oftentimes it's less than that. You don't see that, I think, everywhere. I know you don't see that everywhere. I'm not sure if you see that anywhere else, but that is sort of priority number one, right? Our economic welfare as a city is directly tied to our public health. Number 2, climate health. This is the second component that we need to be addressing in cities through an equitable lens. There are a lot of neighborhoods that have been underserved that are sort of vulnerable to the devastating effects of climate change. We need to look very carefully at Local Law 97, which is focused on making our buildings more energy effective. And how do we do that across the city so that we meet or beat our state, the levels of energy efficiency required by state law by 2024. And the third thing is, which goes back to the other two, is business attraction and retention. We are continually making the case that New York City is the place to do business. We are so innovative. We're investing so much in emerging and growing industries. We have the talent. The city wants to partner with businesses who are coming to New York City, who want to stay in New York City. We are here. We are open for business. And there is no better place to do business than New York City. And this is true in life sciences, it's true in climate change, and it's true in so many emerging industries. And it's also true in prop tech.
That's certainly true. And how prop tech will affect all of these areas that you've both highlighted, particularly making things more convenient, making things more attractive to attract talent, and very much an issue, particularly of late, is equality. Equitable distribution of services to everyone is a huge issue, and we hope that prop tech can be one of the ways we can level the playing field there. Let's go back up to like this 30,000 foot level with Nikki. You're known as a big picture futurist of the built world. Letting your grasp exceed your reach for the moment, what would your vision have us see in the city of the future? You can go as far with that as you wish.
Oh my gosh. So I've got to go up 30,000 feet, and then I've got to project ahead, 20, 30, 50 years. Oh my gosh, this is no small task. Well, thank you very much for giving me such liberties. Just before I move on to that, I also want to just piggyback off everything that, Faye said so eloquently. Something that I also would add into what makes New York just such a special place, and with the pandemic response, is just its nimbleness and the way that it was able to mobilize and bring in new initiatives that were risky. And just, with the open streets and other initiatives, I mean, it's been incredible. And just to see the way that the city's transformed by, embracing in its DNA innovation and that fighting spirit of no one's sitting around waiting for things to get better. It's like, okay, well, what can I do? And, hey, my neighbor's doing that. Like, let's get together. And what are we going to invent? And all the rest. It's just, it's part of the city's DNA, this fighting spirit. And that's what's going to keep the city evolving, which is, something in unprecedented ways, ways we can't predict, which is something I'm excited about. But moving on, in terms of, this hypothetical city of the future where, I'm going to have, a little bit of fun just pointing out some trends that are coming and some trends that we want to be thinking about. The first thing we want to be thinking about is the future resident in the city, and just in terms of, generationally, who we're accommodating. And, if you zoom in with your eyes into this picture behind me, and you look at the Manhattan skyline, you'll actually see that the average age of a building in the city is 84 years old. So that, the fixed infrastructure of the city actually predates a lot of the technology that is, stock standard for us. So if we try to predate, if we try to jump into the future and think about, well, what are the buildings, even a Hudson Yards or something that's, new in Midtown that's going up today, how can that be future-proof for something that's coming in 84 years' time with technology changing so much? I don't think any of us could even, fathom a guess because of what's happening. So, but I'm going to take another jump though. One of the things we love talking about is 2030. I love talking about Gen Z, the next generation coming up after us millennials. Us millennials we're we always get a bit of a bad reputation as being a little bit difficult. Gen Z is going to be even more difficult because they're going to be relentless in their desire and their need for having everything as tech enabled. They're the first generation that's born into a world that has the internet. They've never known a world without it. So their experience of everyday life between the physical environment, it needs to start blending this interaction between the physical and the digital. So that's going to be something quite interesting to see the way that cities embrace even more so this move towards digitization, and obviously with prop tech playing a big role in that. So the first one being generational. The second thing that I find quite exciting is around some of the stuff that's happening in mobility technology. I recently wrote a piece about autonomous shuttles, which on the surface, it seems like, okay, so you have a shuttle and it doesn't have a driver. Okay, great. Like what's kind of the big deal? But what I came to learn is that actually when you have an autonomous shuttle, what it can do is that you're programming in set routes. So rather than having a fixed train line or a fixed subway line that goes along a predetermined route, you can now have a vehicle that has no fixed infrastructure. It can be, programmed to change its course, at an instant, and just kind of riding through. So in terms of decision making and having flexibility, I think that's something that's incredibly exciting. Other things that are happening in mobility, we love the shared economy where we're sharing bikes and scooters, and next will probably be hoverboards. But also, one of the things that is coming is also drones and drone taxis. The first use expected to be flying from airports into the cities. Hyundai, their CEO, is saying that by 2030, they're going to have drone taxis. A lot of cities around the world are already building skyports to accommodate this. So our skyline is going to be littered by a whole lot of drones and, performing different types of jobs, whether it's, moving people around or moving cargo around. So that's going to be quite exciting. Last year and this year, NASA actually ran some working groups around this, getting industry input. So they're thinking about flight paths and everything that's coming. And the impact on our city is going to be quite incredible. And then another item I'd like to throw in is also, which, Faye spoke about, is just the sustainability, the attention to sustainability, and especially with the city addressing, the Climate Mobilization Act with initiatives such as Local Law 97. What our city is going to be doing, and especially in terms of buildings existing and new, is that they are going to start being more carbon efficient and, working towards a net zero future. So if we can get it right, we're going to have cleaner cities, greater quality of life, a healthier quality of life. And I'm very positive that I think it's going to be, we're going to see a lot that's very unexpected coming through, but we're also going to see a lot that's very, very, very familiar considering how long our buildings last.
Well, that's a lot of interesting thoughts, and I agree. I think I'm always totally bullish on big cities, and particularly New York. So it'll be great to see what happens over the next few to 30 years, and hope I'm around to see it. One of the things you mentioned was nimbleness, and I think that's a really important point. We have done at Commercial Observer a poll on our social media platform, which will be available to everyone, I hope, shortly. And in that poll, a lot of the questions and answers from people have to do with transportation and that intersection between prop tech and transportation, and how all of that technologically can be moved ahead and varied to give people options to be able to get around the city. It's a huge deal. As anyone who's driven around New York knows, the old joke by Dave Barry was, how long does it take to drive from the east side of Manhattan to the west side? And the answer is no one knows, because it's never been accomplished. So we're trying to rectify things like that. Turning to Faye again, in your work for EDC, you and your colleagues have to deal with the hard, pragmatic realities of bringing New York City facilities into a more efficient and sustainable future. Of course, a lot of that is housing. What are you looking for from prop tech to help achieve that? And what are you actually using now?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question, Phil. This is a really exciting time for the city and prop tech, because we have looked at this industry and all of the exciting developments, next generation technologies that Nikki's talking about, and thought, okay, this is a thriving sector in New York City that's at the cutting edge of sustainability and mobility and all of these smart homes and AI, and everybody has a stake in this. And so we said, okay, there's this industry on this hand, and then there's this massive New York City real estate footprint that we have between three agencies, NYCHA, the Citywide Administrative Services, and EDC. We own or manage 490 million square feet of real estate in New York City. That's 18 square miles laid end to end, If we did that, it would cover 80% of Manhattan. That's a lot. And yet, a lot of this is not the type of real estate that's being targeted by the prop tech industry for innovation. This is class B and C. And we said, okay, how do we bring this innovation to our real estate portfolio? And that's something that, this goes back to equity, right? How do we take these technologies and make sure they're not available only to luxury building dwellers? How do they benefit all of New York City? And also in a current budgetary environment, we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on this, right? So we talked to the prop tech industry, and what they told us was they're looking for ways to pilot technology, right? We could be a testing ground for some of their technologies so that somebody might come into, say, a NYCHA building with something that improves air quality or boiler maintenance or any of the other aspects that need to happen in a building of that scale to modernize. And so we put out an RFP in December asking for operators to come in and help bridge the New York City real estate stock with the prop tech industry, so that folks, all of this innovation that's happening in the prop tech sphere, and when they need a proof of concept, they need to be able to say, this works. We're here to pilot those technologies. So we are going to be a partner in piloting new technologies in prop tech across the city's real estate portfolio, so that we get the advantages of the technology in our real estate in our buildings, and the prop tech industry gets proof of concept and improves their technology by trying it out in practice.
Great. That's a big order of business. And I was in on this a couple of years ago when it first started gaining momentum of the intersection of prop tech and city services. And we can only hope there'll be a lot more of that very soon. I'm seeing now, are there
It's
questions?
just me sharing my contact details for everyone to stay in touch
Very
virtually.
Good. This is good. Somebody technologically ahead of me. Gee, how many millions can that be? But just wanted to make sure there were no questions from the group, the audience. So now we're getting down to about the last 7 minutes of our panel. So I'm going to ask both of you, and you can really, again, go back and forth on this. How can each of your unique perspectives on cities merge to provide a better work, live, play environment for all citizens?
I can go first again if that's good for you. I think I love this mentality of flexibility and being open to the changes that are happening. And if we have a fixed mindset about what a building needs to be or what a space needs to be, even when people are changing and the ways that we use space or what we need to do inside a building or outside of a building functionally, even if that's changing, that's not going to serve us. So, I'm always talking, especially when we talk about workplace, I say any place can be a workplace and any place can be anything. And I think the more that we can, work between, loosen up red tape to allow for flexibility in this kind of a way. I know there are zoning constraints, and of course there are, building codes and a whole lot of other things, leasing terms and realities that restrict this. But I think when we can take a step back and say, well, let's actually think, quite logically about, what else can we do and be, flexible, agile, and just embracing the changes to set a new direction for things. I think that's what I'd like to be seeing.
I think those are some great points, and I think that makes a lot of sense for ways to think about collaborating. I think that our perspective on the issue is tech for good. If you think about our work in life sciences, we're building an ecosystem. There's a business attraction component. We're supporting R&D, so we're supporting innovation. And we're also helping people by keeping them safe and healthy and pioneering technologies across a variety of life sciences sectors that make life better for people. Another example is offshore wind, which is an area that we are investing in. This is an emerging industry. We are leveraging city assets for this industry. We are looking at equitable job creation, how to make sure that the offshore wind jobs are good jobs in New York City, how to spread the coming opportunity to as many folks as possible. And again, another example of tech for good. And I think that prop tech there's an opportunity there too, right? Purpose and innovation can really go together. And I think the more that we think about how to leverage these emerging industries in equitable ways, the better we all are. And I think that the industry will innovate better when it thinks about how to innovate for a variety of people across experiences. And I think that we will benefit as a city by enjoying these innovations.
As a follow-up to all that from both of you, to Faye, how do you see the elected officials in this equation, who are often way behind the private sector and even city agencies in innovation? How do you see them factoring in? And then I would ask Nikki a similar question in her experience in other cities, how that sometimes helps or hinders such progress.
So I have to take issue with your question, Phil. I've only been in the public sector for 2.5 years. You know, as Max mentioned, I was a journalist and I worked at the Observer many years ago. And when I came to EDC, I had some of those similar biases. I mean, I heard great things about EDC, but I had heard that government was bureaucratic and slow moving. And while I will say that we have our own timetable for getting things done sometimes, I have never worked in a more entrepreneurial, fast-moving, nimble environment with incredibly forward-looking, thoughtful people who are way ahead, actually, on a lot of these ideas. It's not my experience of this realm, and I can only speak of my experience, is nothing like you're describing. And we also have a whole new class of council members and many new elected officials across the city, and many of them are thinking about these very same things that we're talking about today.
Well, that's encouraging because it's not always the case, particularly on a federal level. Nikki, what do you think about in other cities? What have you seen?
Firstly, I'm going to echo Faye's sentiment. Everyone that I've come across at the NYC EDC has just been the cream of the crop and just very forward focused. So you've landed in a great place with very smart and very smart people that get it. In terms of innovation and mindset globally, in terms of what's happening, every city has its own flavor in terms of what they're able and willing to do. And I think it just does come down a lot to individuals in any organization. I think it's less about the organization or the space, the place or the structures of it. It's about who's actually inside going, I'm so excited about this concept and is willing to drive it forward. Especially, one of the things that I find when I do speak to prop techs, and I'm sure Phil, you might find that you're having very similar conversations when you ask them about, well, what is your biggest barrier to adoption or someone trying your products? Like, well, we just need to find that one person in the organization that gets it. And sometimes it's, sometimes you can identify an innovation person because they quite literally have innovation sitting in their title. And sometimes it's just somebody that has an interest in, in these things. I think, one thing I'd kind of implore people that are on this call who I assume are interested in innovation is that if you are one of those people, especially from the real estate world, that are, is interested in prop tech or innovation, put that in your LinkedIn profile to essentially self-identify as someone that's, willing and open to, try new things out, because that would definitely help some of the innovators, identify you. Sounds simple, sounds a little bit obvious, but it makes a big difference.
No, I don't think it's obvious at all. I think it's a great point, one that's often overlooked. And I couldn't agree more with you and Faye that my experiences with both EDC agencies in general in New York has been very positive and forward-looking. And on the private sector side in particular, in my past working in prop tech, having a innovation champion in a house is a key factor in anything moving forward. So that being said, I want to thank Nikki and Faye for their really terrific panel work here today. Very thoughtful, very on point, and we really appreciate your coming. And I'll turn it back over to Max. Thank you both.
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Faye. Thanks, Nikki. What a great conversation. For our next panel, the rise of smart cities, are welcoming back Deputy Editor of Commercial Observer, Tom Acatelli, who will be speaking to Shanti Eldridge of Amazon Web Services and Adam Rashid of JBG Smith. So I put things in your hands, Tom.
Thank you, Max. Shantae and Adam, can you hear me?
We can. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
fantastic. Yep. Okay, great. So I just wanted to start, this is perhaps the marquee event of the whole panel. So I want to start with, can you guys just introduce yourselves very quickly? Your respective backgrounds and what you do.
Shantae, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll jump in. I'm Shantae Aldridge. I'm an executive government advisor with Amazon Web Services, and I work in the state and local government space. And what that actually means is I work with our account managers and mostly senior and elected officials on how they're going to utilize new technologies to really grow their cities and make them equitable and a place where constituents can get the services they need. I'm able to do that after being here for 2.5 years, because prior to coming to AWS, I was in government for 23 years at the state and local level, with my last position being the Deputy Chief of Operations for the City of Baltimore. And because, in government, we wear 5,000 hats, one of my jobs was to run our $4.5 million innovation fund, which we did use to really build a digital city.
Adam?
Adam Rashid here. I'm a senior vice president at JBG Smith, and I co-head our smart cities practice. That smart cities for us is we're focused on building National Landing that sits just outside of Washington, D.C., home to Amazon's HQ2 and Virginia Tech's Innovation Campus, an area roughly the size of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, with an existing office density the size of downtown Austin. We're focused on building that place into the United States' first 5G smart city at scale. And so I'm charged with deploying investment capital, devising a strategy and bring on partners to help us bring that vision to fruition, with a focus on IoT, AI, cybersecurity, cloud, and edge computing to try to make a National Landing again one of the most connected places in the U.S. and a true smart city.
Okay, thank you. Stepping back, sort of taking a bird's eye view, can each of you define a smart city in the broadest terms and what we're talking about now?
I'll jump in first. And from my perspective, the term smart city has evolved since I started working on this probably 5 or 6 years ago in the city of Baltimore. I think now, being especially on the AWS side, we're looking at it as a digital city, right? Making sure that, again, constituents can communicate with government, making sure that constituents can thrive in the quality of life. And, especially coming out of the year we just had, technology is, at everyone's forefront. We were ordering groceries, when I myself had never ordered groceries online before. But the fact now, I don't know if I'll ever stop using, one of those grocery delivery or, ordering food from our favorite restaurant. So for me, a digital city just means, those modern technologies that make it easier to get around, but also easier to just live and thrive in the city or county or the state that you live in.
Yeah, I would agree with Shantae, and smart city is a bit of a misnomer. I agree with Shantae. We should probably be referring to it as kind of a digital city. And I think that a digital city, ultimately, the big vision is this place where everything is seamlessly connected in real time. And so for that to happen, from our perspective, it starts with the digital infrastructure, right? We really believe that connectivity is really the fourth utility, right? It's as important to modern life as water, gas, electric. And so for us, what our big investments right now are on digital infrastructure, from the fiber layer to the wireless connectivity around 5G, making sure that connectivity is indoor and outdoor, to allowing for people to have both public and private networks from a security perspective. And again, it's laying this digital infrastructure so we can truly have a digital city that allows for that seamless connectivity that both the public sector and the private sector can utilize to make humans' lives better in this interconnected place.
That's great. What are some of the elements needed to get this sort of digital city up and going, or digital neighborhood or area?
Yeah.
What are the building blocks?
For us, it starts first with the physical space, right? JBG Smith is over a 60-year history of kind of building physical spaces. We are a mixed-use real estate owner and operator, and we have a long history of physical placemaking, curating retail, curating public spaces. We've taken a lot of those principles and applied them to the digital realm. And for us, it's the building blocks of that digital layer starts with digital infrastructure. And for us, there's 5 component parts to our digital infrastructure topology. It starts with the fiber layer, making sure that we have robust and redundant fiber that runs east, west, north, south. So all buildings, all street furniture, everything can be connected to kind of the lifeblood of connectivity, which is fiber optic cabling. When we move up our stack, it goes to outdoor 5G. And so 5G, to really harness the true power of 5G, you will need small cells, little radio antennas every 150 to 250 yards to allow for the radio signals to be broadcasted. And so for us, it's helpful that we own so much real estate in this place. We own 70% of the owner control through management, 70% of the real estate in this 30 million square foot submarket. So it allows us to help put those small cells both on our buildings and on light poles and other things within there. Continuing up kind of this digital infrastructure stack, fiber, small cells, then we want to make sure that there's indoor connectivity. So we have distributed antenna systems so that outdoor connectivity can go inside of buildings. So there's this seamless connectivity for human beings within the market. One of the last areas is we are installing urban data centers. And it's this idea that, a lot of the computational power that will be necessary for us to have kind of real-time analytics and real-time seamless connectivity, it needs to happen closer to where the devices are, and it'll allow you to do many of your cloud functions closer in an urban data center. And so those are the building blocks of the digital infrastructure.
Shantae, do you want to draw on your experience in the public sector as well? Talk about those sort of the elements that go in.
Absolutely. For me, and talking, with had to deal with a lot of real estate, right? Commercial, and some people that were coming in for nonprofits and so forth. I think it really relies on making sure that everybody is at the table. And I think that is one of the more fundamental building blocks. And I mean, government as well as real estate has to be at this table at the same time. I've seen where we've had some amazing plans, and from a city standpoint, we're like, this is great. It's going to drive the economy. And then you talk to the community and they're like, we don't want that here. Or this really isn't benefiting us. Or wait, where's the playground? You're building all these houses, but where are the kids going to play? Wait, where's the school? Right? Our next school is, if I move here, it may be 15 miles away. And so to really making sure that you're actually building a smart city or digital city that is really going to be utilized for all the hard resources that everybody's going to put into it. Having everybody at the table at the beginning is going to cut out a lot of the rework cuts out some of the bad press, because I've had to navigate that, where now I'm on the news explaining why we're building this, why are we giving, TIFs, why are we doing this, when again, just doing a little bit of that up front may have had, there may be some disagreement, but then everybody just commits in and we keep it going forward.
Now, with so many people working from home, or long-term, or hybrid work models being adopted by companies, and government agencies, nonprofits, etc. How does a smart city work, or a digital city work now in an environment where a lot of people are working remotely? What are the challenges and the opportunities there?
Well, I think it's one about looking at the infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, I'm talking more about the IoT, right? The Internet of Things. What are those mechanisms out there that's making it easier for people to work or do business when they don't have to be in a physical brick and mortar location? And I know that's something that a lot of cities right now are really struggling with, because their real estate isn't coming back downtown, right? They're saying we're gonna stay where we're at. We may be canceling leases and so forth and so on. So how can we still make those places sometimes hubs, right? Because some people still might have to work. So now we think about, okay, are we now transitioning from being just everybody's here every day to maybe a co-working space, and having some of that technology, that they can, look at Zoom. Look at what happened with Zoom over the last year, because people were used to being in the same room to collaborate. Yes, we can see each other face to face, but what happens when I have to share a document? So again, making sure some of the technology is in place, and I got to be quiet because I can't yell because she'll wake up, but using Alexa devices, right? How is that making it easier for us to connect and make, if I want to know where's my bus schedule, or, is this paper submitted, you can build Alexa skills using, enabled devices to do that as well. So I think it really goes to how can we're working differently now. Some companies may not be coming back to brick and mortar, but how can we still, keep that evolution going where it still feels like we're in a seamless environment?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Shantae is 100% right. And I think it does start with the infrastructure. IoT, kind of, top of the list as far as beefing up the infrastructure. But I also think about kind of more those digital infrastructure pieces that I laid out there being enabling for kind of a new type of kind of hybrid work. I was reading an article a couple of days ago about Microsoft putting out some new products that will allow for true life-size holograms in the office space. So as opposed to us being kind of across the computer screen now, I could have a hologram that is the size of Shantae and her likeness sitting next to me, and us being able to have that kind of conversation. This technology exists today, right?
Okay.
Why is it not widespread? Is because there's not the digital infrastructure, the 5G capability that allows for that. For you to actually do that, you would need a lot of bandwidth, and you would need what's called ultra low latency, no lag time between you and the device. And so that's the environment that we're trying to enable with our digital infrastructure investments, such that tomorrow it's not just kind of this two-dimensional kind of interaction for our hybrid work. You can expand that to new technologies that allow for completely new immersive ways for us to do work in this new world that we live in, which is ultimately going to be a hybrid world where some people are home and some people are in the office.
You both kind of touched on this just now, but in terms of types of workers and what kind of companies or industries, which have the most to gain from locating in a digital city environment?
I'm sorry, you said which companies have the
most? Which kinds of companies, which types of workers have the most to gain locating in a digital city environment? Is there a particular type that can benefit more than others? Or
for us, we've begun to focus on 4 major industries. And I'll tell you why and which ones, but I'll caveat by saying I think every company will benefit, because what we're talking about now and kind of this next generation of connectivity and digital integration and technology, it's akin to the computer, right? It's akin to electricity, right? So all industries were really affected by these new kind of technologies. For us, we focused on IoT. right? And this is the idea that kind of everything in our physical environment will eventually be connected to the internet, from your stove to your table to your glasses to your car, everything connected to the Internet of Things, right? To the Alexa devices. The second is artificial intelligence. It's the idea that the growth in artificial intelligence and effectively automation will be greatly enhanced by all of the data that is able to be able to process from those IoT devices. And so if you have the digital infrastructure to enable massive IoT, the great amounts of IoT, it will create a lot of data that can feed new types of artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. The third is cybersecurity. It's the idea that if everything is connected to the internet, there's kind of new cyber threats, but there's new opportunities for people to create solutions around cybersecurity. And the fourth is cloud and edge computing. Much of our computational power has gone to AWS servers, right? That is a trend that we think is going to continue over time. And as more things are connected to the internet, you will need more for that. Additionally, as you will need more analytics, some of that power that's currently out in far out data centers will need to come closer to the device in an edge computing location.
Right. I'm just curious, how big a role do data centers play in this thinking? Is this something you guys think, does proximity matter? It has to be near a center, right? Or
from my standpoint, no.
Okay.
So right now, I don't even know where the AWS data centers are, right? And there's a reason for that, because they are secure. And so you don't necessarily need to, people are using data centers that are in other countries. Some are using data centers that are, near them. It really depends on what you're using the data center for. If you're using it for long-term storage, then no, it does not have to be next to you. If you're looking for latency, there is technology that will help with that latency. So again, there isn't that drag time, but you do not physically have to be located near a data center. And we actually have technology at AWS that helps in some of our rural, our communities, where they're able to still use cloud computing through different technologies that we have. I'm not going to, people can find me on LinkedIn or find me, I'll tell you about all the technology, but it's about the mechanism to be able to upload your information. It doesn't necessarily rely on just proximity.
Okay.
I completely agree with Shantae. I've been talking about kind of the proximity here. Again, it will definitely depend upon the applications that you're using. To Shantae's point, for storage, for things that are you're not accessing right now, which is most of the things that we're doing in today's world. Absolutely, location doesn't matter. There are applications when we think about kind of computer vision or immersive kind of augmented reality that will require lower latency. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we're investing in is urban data centers for those type of applications. But again, for the vast majority of our applications, proximity is less important. For some applications that will kind of be existing in this kind of new 5G world, the proximity of the data center does, it does enhance those capabilities.
Okay. I've heard 5G a lot in this discussion. So how contingent is the rise of digital cities on 5G, the rollout nationally? I mean,
I'll just speak from our perspective. Again, you asked what we would define as a digital city, as a smart mm-hmm. city, and we would say that that's a place where everything is seamlessly connected in real time.
Okay.
And in order to enable that vision, and others will have different visions, but in order to enable that vision, you will need 5G technology, 5G communication to do that. This idea that everything, literally everything in your world, IoT, is connected to the internet. There's kind of I'll take a real step back. There's three main components of 5G. One is massive IoT connection, this ability for us to connect everything on a network. Maybe we've been in a stadium and we've been trying to make a call out and it's you can't do it. It's not because there's something wrong with your phone, it's because the network doesn't support that many devices. On a 5G network, that is able to happen. kind of this seamless connectivity, you need ultra low latency, lower lag time between the devices to happen. And for you to do things like holograms or really high definition videos, you will need massive bandwidth, which also you get on a 5G network. Mm-hmm. Again, there are definitely parts of a digital city that do not require 5G, but to get to kind of where we think of as kind of this everything connected in real time, you need the attributes of 5G to make that happen.
I wanted to ask you, how do you ensure there's an equitable shot at the benefits of these digital city technologies?
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, when I talked about the 3Ps, the public-private partnerships, I think that's where that really comes into play. And it's something that I've been talking about just from my AWS side and having been in government. Yes, we want to modernize. Yes, everybody wants these digital cities, but you need to make sure that it is equitable. Not everybody in your city is going to be able to afford. And you also don't want to create a situation where all of the cool technology is in the wealthier communities. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really important to realize when you're, and go back to your earlier question about real estate and, what attracts companies or, who benefits. I think you go to where the market is, but you also, again, there's some, from a city standpoint or a county or state, making sure that there is responsibility that the digital divide does not become wider with the application of modern technology. And so making sure that everybody's able to have an experience. I'll just give you an example of something that I went through in my city where we did have a company that was coming in to put the kiosk in, right? Okay. The digital kiosks that tell you, where you're going and where the weather is and what attractions. And they were really only looking at putting those downtown. And I stepped in and said, that's not going to happen. Yes, we do want to attract people downtown, but we need the IoT, as Adam was saying, also for weather and pollution. And we could use that across the entire city because they serve as sensors, letting me know where's their traffic pattern. Sometimes they have cameras that can watch traffic, so again, making sure that you're building an equitable city, yes, modern, but everybody in your city should benefit, not just your wealthier communities.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to ask, we touched on this earlier in the panel, but how do you build the elements of a digital city in a particularly historic metropolis or an area that just maybe doesn't want as much has sort of averse to change in its built environment? How do you do that? Like it presents physical challenges, but also working with the community. I mean, what do you do? What's the groundwork there?
It's work. And I'll give back going to Adam. So you can't throw a rock in most, highly dense cities without hitting a 5G pole. They're everywhere, right? And they have to be in order because 5G works differently where you need that line of sight. And if I go wrong, but you usually need that line of sight. And so in a city like Baltimore or, a lot of the cities on the East Coast are very historic. And so you don't always want to slap this big old box on the side of this building that's been there since the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And so we had to get really creative and pull all of the providers to the table that were utilizing 5G and utilizing those boxes. And we said, all right, we got to come up with a solution. And so we got an agreement where they all agreed if we came up with a design that everybody would use the same box. So that way I didn't have two poles sitting side by side. And I also had to have poles that really fit in with the historic value of the city, because yes, we do want to be modern, but we want to also, that's why some people move to cities. It's historic. We can't lose that history. Mm-hmm. And so it takes work, but again, it takes everybody sitting down at the table and being able to give and take. As a government, you can't be like, well, nope, it has to be this way. And as, real estate or commercial, or the companies have to be able to say, yes, we want to be respectful of the cities that we're going into, because in order for that, everybody, you can't make money if you're in a lock, right? So in order to have everybody thrive, you have to, but again, it takes someone, unfortunately, has to have that conversation. It's not organically going to happen. Somebody has to take the bull by the horns and really have everybody at the table.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Shantae more. I think we've really leaned a lot in my practice, in the smart cities practice. We've really leaned a lot on kind of our traditional real estate development professionals here who they spend a ton of time with community engagement, right? Ton of time with community engagement on both on the personal level, kind of meeting individuals in the community, and at the government level within the counties that we work. And you know, you've seen some other smart city projects kind of around the world that have been less successful because you've had technologists who had ideas around kind of rolling out a smart city, but they did not understand the things that Shantae was saying about, hey, this you're building a city, right? You're building you're a part of people's lives. And so we've tried to be very intentional about that, both about the aesthetic as we think about kind of rolling out, small cells, taking into community concerns. We recently, announced a transaction, a public-private partnership with Arlington County, and using some of the county's fiber assets to enhance their kind of goals around both digital divide and around kind of economic development. And I agree with Shantae. It takes a convening party, an orchestrator to help that happen. Oftentimes it can be cities. We feel really fortunate that we own so much in this area that we can act as that party. But yeah, it takes a group or a few groups to really orchestrate a really complex and disparate ecosystem to make these things come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to, we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to ask, what other lessons have you learned in your work with, digital cities and technology? And do you have any warnings for the audience? Any particular challenges that arose that you could speak to?
I have two, and one, especially for, real estate, looking at that field, use the data that's there. Right. A lot of cities right now, especially in major cities, have open data platforms, or you can get information from your business, your commerce department, things of that nature. Yes, it's great to want to open a coffee shop, but if you pull the data and you find that there's not a lot of people that would fit your market for the type of establishment you want to have, that might not be the best place to locate. And when talking about digital cities, if you're trying to utilize certain technology, a lot of these co-working spaces are opening up. If you're moving to a city that doesn't have a lot of, people who are remote workers or not a lot of entrepreneurs, then you may be looking at, am I going to the right place? And so I really say utilize the data. I'm coming from a data-driven company. I use data a lot when I was in government, and it really helps make better decisions. And you can also make sure and talk to the people. And that's my other lesson learned. Again, there were so many things that I rolled out. I was like, this is going to be fantastic. Everybody's going to love it. And we roll it out, and the community's like, yeah, no, we're not loving this. And so now I'm like, all right, now I got to go back and do the community forums, put everything on hold. And so really, again, talking to the people that live there are going to utilize your, whatever you're building or, the establishment that you're trying to expand, because it really does make a difference. And when you have the community on your side, it makes life so much easier.
That's good. Adam?
I would say, things may take a little longer than your pro forma suggests. So build that into. I come from an investments background, so I think of, I think about it from that perspective as well. Things take a little bit longer. To Shantae's point, you got to engage with the people and the community and the other stakeholders to make sure that, this is a complex tapestry that we're trying to weave here, from telecom providers to fiber providers to data center providers to community members to government officials. And so, just understand that there's a lot of folks that are coming to the table, and try to, in every situation, try to put yourself in their shoes to try to figure out the best solution. It won't always, you can't always do that, but that, coming from that perspective has been helpful in us to try to get this stuff off the ground.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ask one last question. We've touched on some of the technologies that are upcoming and that will be part of digital cities in the near term and long term. Are there any that you haven't mentioned that will just blow people's minds, that are in the works? Anything you can talk about? Anything that will be the Zoom of 2022, 2023?
All I can say from my standpoint, obviously the company I work for, I can't really divulge anything that's up and coming, but follow me on LinkedIn. We make announcements all the time.
I'm not gonna even, I don't know. That's the thing that's the most exciting to us, right? Is like we didn't know that Uber was going to change our lives, right? In 2008, 7, when 4G was kind of being rolled out. We had no idea that kind of, what that Uber was going to happen, or Instagram was going to change the way that we interact. And so I'm just super excited to see what happens, and we want to try to build that infrastructure again for innovators to come to National Landing to say, hey, I'm creating that new thing, and us to just kind of watch in awe as we did over the last kind of decade.
That is all the time we have. I want to thank Shante Eldridge and Adam Rashid. And I'd like to now, thank you very much. And thank you for all who tuned in. And I'd like to now turn it back to Max Gross, Editor-in-Chief, for our closing keynote with Dan Doctoroff, Chairman and CEO of Sidewalk Labs.
Hello, I'm here with Dan Doctoroff. Everybody should know who that is. He was Deputy Mayor for Economic Development and Rebuilding for the City of New York under Mayor Bloomberg. He was President and Chief Executive Officer of Bloomberg LP, and he is currently Chairman and CEO of Sidewalk Labs. Dan, welcome.
It's great to be here, Max.
So I wanted to start with a kind of broad question, but we've just had 18 months of COVID.
Right.
What did COVID do to urban planning?
Well, when I say what did it do to urban planning, I think the question is, what will it do to urban planning? I think before COVID, we were to some extent facing, at least in New York and other kind of the superstar cities, facing a bit of a crisis from an urban planning perspective, i.e. the old notions of growth were growing outmoded. People had felt that the growth over the last 25 years was not fair, equitably distributed, increasingly, that there were kind of racial biases in a lot of the planning that had taken place and the impacts of it. And so I think before COVID, we were moving toward a new model of growth, which I might call inclusive growth, where recognizing that cities got to grow, but the growth needs to be fair, needs to take into account some of those racial underlying issues, that we also have to be sensitive to the fact that we're a competitive entity. So I think what we're going to see going forward is an approach to planning that is far more comprehensive, that takes into account various inequities, and the demands for that are going to be greater. So let me give you an example of that. We think about transportation. In some ways, transportation, we've got an incredible mass transit system in New York, but that if you live in an outlying area, for example, in Queens, where typically people who are less advantaged will live, it can take you an hour and a half to get to work. And that's fundamentally not fair, right? You lose time with your family, you're exhausted at the end of the day. So how do we correct for that? And I think when we think about planning, we're going to have to start thinking of new ways to actually get people where they want to go faster. And the good news is we've got lots of new approaches to actually dealing with those problems. The bad news is we've never looked at those things comprehensively enough to be able to really take, I think, a vigorous action to change things.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are talking about the fact that the Biden administration has been advancing a tremendous amount of capital to, stimulate the economy, to provide some funds for some of these things. Do you think that those are some of the things that will be in his budget?
Probably not so much right now. I think there's actually been an underemphasis in the stimulus package, the reconciliation bill that's been proposed, that I think don't talk enough about how to innovate. Cities, in order to become more inclusive and grow and satisfy the needs for greater inclusivity, are going to have to innovate. And I think it's very important that what we see going forward is money to encourage experimentation and innovation. We'll see if over time those bills, but it shouldn't just be left to the federal government. It's really got to be at the initiative of the cities themselves. And so, as I said, I think when you look across buildings, you look at mobility, you look at public space, you look at infrastructure and sustainability, digital infrastructure, we've got to find ways to provide benefits to more people. You asked kind of what did COVID change about that? COVID merely exposed those divisions and those inequities in even more dramatic ways than they were obvious before. And so I think the demands to respond to them are only going to grow going forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, now I know that Sidewalk Labs is not just in New York; it's in a lot of places. Which are some of the cities that are taking a creative approach? Who's been doing interesting things, either on the tech front or on the planning front? What are some of the things that we've seen?
I don't think there's any city today that stands as a model for kind of incorporating innovation into what they do. There are places that are better at certain things, better at thinking about space and how it's utilized. They're better at government and how government actually interacts with its citizens using innovation or technology. Probably the single best place in the world for that, believe it or not, is Estonia, a country, not really? A city. Oh yeah. Barcelona is frequently mentioned as one of the cities. In certain ways, New York actually has been, a leader in some ways, particularly the use of data. So there's a bunch of different cities that are doing interesting things, but no one yet who has really tried to put it all together and take advantage of what's now available.
Well, so tell me a little bit about what Sidewalk Labs has been doing for the last 18 months.
Yeah, so what we've done is we engage in placemaking. We work with developers, to some extent cities. We set sort of ambitious goals for kind of planning with them. And out of that work, we develop what we think are unique insights about the future of cities or the future of real estate. And we turn them into companies. So as an example, out of the work we've done on sort of inclusive growth, we developed a company, a healthcare company, which is pioneering a new way to think about serving the urban poor. It basically leverages the concept of the social determinants of health, saying effectively that access to food and food security, being able to get to appointments, housing security are just as important to health outcomes as medical care. And so effectively what we've done is created an approach that basically combines that social care with health care. And it's so far, it's called City Block. It's based in Brooklyn. It has been, we think, incredibly encouraging so far. We are focused on data in the urban environment. Out of some of the work that we've done, thinking about how to dramatically reduce the percentage of people who live in urban areas who need a car, we discovered that there was terrible data that could inform decisions that could actually help to reach that objective. And so we created a company called Replica, which is sort of the new type of urban data company that gives you a complete picture of where people are coming from, where they're going, what they do along the way, what would happen if you did certain interventions like close down a street or create a large development in terms of how people move around that has really started to take off. We've got a huge effort focused on mass timber buildings. And we're including tall mass timber buildings, which we believe ultimately at scale can enable people to produce buildings at maybe 20 to 25% less cost, maybe 50% faster in terms of construction time, and maybe most importantly, reduce carbon emissions out of the building, depending on how you count it, by about 80%. There's another example of how you've got to innovate. We've developed a product called Mesa, which we're really excited about, which is an easy to sensors powered by AI that you put in old buildings, Class B and C commercial buildings, that we think can lower energy use by 20%. In New York, as all landlords know, they're going to have to comply with Local Law 97. It's a very, very easy to install, simple way to actually begin to achieve that. We've got a bunch of others, including a new planning tool that uses machine learning to enable developers and planners and cities to look at a site and optimize for financial, at the same time, for financial outcomes, for environmental impacts, and for other quality of life issues. So, that we develop these insights and we turn them into companies, and so far it's gone well. But these are startups, and nothing's easy for sure.
For sure. Well, I am curious about like what the reception has been like amongst developers. Obviously, you've worked in the city, and that there are many layers in terms of getting anything passed in terms of city governance, and I'm curious about what the reaction has been on behalf of some landlords. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry about that. So we also, by the way, created an advisory service for developers, particularly developing, significant sites. And what we've seen since we just started this a few months ago is a lot of interest, because developers increasingly understand that the demands on them are going to be greater and greater. Whether it's for inclusion, to think about their sites more sustainably and other ways. And so we're working with them to figure out how to do those things. And so all around the country already we're working. And you asked how developers are responding. They understand that the rules of the game, are shifting. They're not 100% sure in what way, but they know that their projects have to respond to these social and political demands that are increasing, and increasing particularly in the wake of COVID.
Let me ask you this. So one of the big things that COVID probably exposed, to use your term, but also, I don't think anybody was actually prepared for this, but just it seems like there's going to be a surplus of office space, older office space that won't necessarily be used as office space in the future. Have you been thinking about that, about how to use some of that space, in a more intelligent way?
Yeah, and I've lived through it to some extent too. In the wake of 9/11, there's a lot of excess office space, old office space in Lower Manhattan, and we turned Lower Manhattan into a much more mixed-use area. I think what's going to happen is, in general, companies, for the most part, are going to allow their employees greater flexibility. The amount of space that companies will need as a result, because there'll be fewer employees in the office every day, I'm guessing it'll be 2/3 of what it would have been before COVID. Now, what is happening when you think about hybrid ways of working? You need more space per person. Also, employees and employers want different kinds of space that typically take more space per person. So, even though you might have 2/3 as many people in the office on a given day going forward, the amount of space won't be 2/3 that's required. It'll probably be, I'm guessing, 90% or something like that. And with that excess space, I think what you will see, hopefully, is faster, easier conversions to other forms of space. And that, for the most part, will be housing. I said, if you go back to Lower Manhattan before 9/11, Lower Manhattan was kind of a ghost town before at night. There were maybe 15 or 20,000 people living in the square mile below Chambers Street. There's now maybe 100,000 or so, and it feels totally different. I think downtowns in general are going to have to adapt. Midtown will be one where you'll see some change. It won't be as dramatic, I think, as most people think, but it will start to change. It'll be more mixed use.
Now, what do you think? I mean, are there any lessons from urban planning that the suburbs can learn from? Obviously, there's been talk about exodus to the suburbs. It was a little bit overblown in terms of what actually happened. But are some of these lessons applicable?
To some extent, I suppose. I think you're right. I think the flood to the suburbs was overstated. The jump in real estate prices because there were people made decisions to accelerate their moves to the suburbs, and there wasn't a whole lot of supply to accommodate them. So it looked more dramatic. Obviously, we're starting to see people come back. If the real estate market in New York over the last couple of months is any indication. I think what we saw before COVID, I think what we'll see increasingly is sort of the densification of suburbs. And many are looking for kind of how to create a bit of more urban feel in the suburbs to attract people who may want to leave a more urban environment. I think the other thing that we're going to see, and this is just one thing, is you've got a massive problem with malls, and sort of how do you rethink malls? There's lots of different hypotheses about that. That's true, by the way, for strip malls, which you see all over the suburbs, but also, large interior malls as well. And I think they're going to change a lot as well. And how that occurs, it'll be interesting to see.
Dan, I want to get your. We mentioned cars and traffic. I wanted to get your take on congestion pricing and traffic. But before we get to that, I did want to ask you: are there any tech innovations that that would really make life better for the city? Like, what is there a magic bullet that you guys are hard at work on that we will see that will completely change cities?
No, the answer is no. Doing things in a physical environment in an urban context, particularly where government is involved, and sometimes more than one level of government, is hard. And therefore, change actually occurs gradually. One thing that is good is when cities experiment and those experiments are successful, they do spread all over the world. I'm reminded of my experience with the High Line. 6 months after we opened the High Line to great acclaim in 2008 or 9, there were 36 High Lines under development around the world. The bike share was another example. Paris, I think, introduced the first bike share system. Within a few years, there were hundreds of them all over the world. So, cities do copy one another, and that's actually good. And we like to see experimentation all over the world, and you like to see it be successful. But there's no magic bullet. Look, we know what we got to do. We've got to find ways to build buildings more cheaply. We need to find ways of producing dramatically more land available for housing. We know that we have to rethink and over time reinvent our energy systems. We know we need to make our cities more adaptable or resilient. And there are ways of doing all these things, but none of them is a quick fix, and none of them is a magic bullet.
Mhm.
Now, something like congestion pricing, you were talking about it, I'm of the view that it's an unqualifiedly good thing at the end of the day. People may remember that we first proposed in the Bloomberg administration congestion pricing in 2007, and it was defeated at the state legislature in 2008. It now has been passed in Albany. Hopefully it'll be actually put in place next year, 14 years later. By the way, we probably gave up over that 14-year period of time about $12 billion that could have been put toward mass transit and improving the mass transit system. The great thing about congestion pricing is it raises revenues, which can be invested back. It also lowers the number of cars on the street, which means we can use the space on the street better. Everybody's been really excited about the restaurant sheds, for example, and we've carved back parking in some ways to accommodate them. I've got my feelings about those restaurant sheds and the danger that they'll just deteriorate in place. But at the end of the day, we should still use the space, and we should use it in all sorts of new ways. And we do have the technology with digital signage. We can embed lights and pavement so that we can make the space much more adaptable. We can create new kinds of space. But the key thing is to return more of the streets to people rather than cars. And we have the ability to actually do that. Congestion pricing is one way to raise the price of the roads and therefore lower the use of them. There are lots of other ways to do that too. We should probably be charging for the curbs and curb space and double parking, again, to raise money, create more space for people rather than cars. And I should point out, enable new forms of mass transit. Think of like VIA on steroids, for example, where you have more informal forms of mass transportation with fewer cars on the road that can get people from place to place a lot faster. So, I said the opportunities are enormous. We just got to have the courage to actually do some of these things.
Is that what you meant when you said earlier that, it seems like your office is where it is, and if you're living in Queens, it's going to take an hour and a half no matter what to get to your office.
It's not that far. It's like it's 10 miles. If there was less traffic, people could get where they want to go. And imagine you have a set of flexible buses that responded to demand and could get to Midtown or to other Brooklyn or other major employment centers much faster. Just imagine how many people's lives would be significantly improved by that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the one, I guess, wrench in this seems to be that more people are actually buying cars right now. That there has been a sudden surge, and I have to admit I'm a little bit a guilty party in this, in the sense that I bought a car during COVID, just because I was terrified of going on the subway. I don't use it every day, but does that throw a wrench into your plans?
I think that's probably a temporary blip, to be honest. But it does highlight a really important point that you've alluded to, is that we know that public safety is a foundation for the success of a city. Now, today, public health is as well. And it's imperative, particularly for the MTA, to make people feel safe and healthy on the subways and buses and trains. That is the foundation for this, but that's not the whole answer. We still got to get more cars off the roads.
Now, Dan, you obviously worked in government. We just had a very long, drawn-out primary. I did want to ask you, well, first off, let's say you have 10 minutes alone with Eric Adams. What do you say to him? What should be his priority first on his agenda?
Well, first of all, I think he has to decide, but I think he has an enormous opportunity to innovate. I know he's somebody who believes in innovation. I think he's somebody who believes strongly in technology. And so I would, again, encourage him to focus on kind of how we actually think about these urban systems differently and innovate around them, recognizing, as I think he does, and it's part of the reason why he won the primary, is that the foundation for success of cities is public safety. Now, obviously, we have to do that in a just way, which I think he also understands. I'd add to that, as I mentioned, public health. But then in order to create sort of this inclusive growth, and he, by the way, has been a believer in growth. You know, he was in favor of Amazon, he was in favor of Industry City, but he also recognizes that we've got to make that growth fairer. So, and I think he naturally understands, because of his orientation toward believing in innovation, that we're going to have to innovate our way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that city government is better or worse than when you were in the city?
You know, look, I think that you can disagree with some of the policies of the Bloomberg administration, but I don't think you can disagree with the effectiveness of government and the way it operated. You know, Mike structured government in an incredibly thoughtful way that enabled people to get things done. And I think, you know, we need somewhat of a return to that. There's, you know, it's basic blocking and tackling. It's basic finding great people to run, be deputy mayors and run agencies. It's about empowering them. It's about them feeling like they're free to innovate without, you know, over politicization of things. If we can get back to that, then we can have a very successful Adams mayoralty.
Mm-hmm. Or a Curtis Lewa, you never know. Right?
Well, I'll say that again.
Or a Curtis Lewa, you never know.
It could be. That's right. We shouldn't presume. We shouldn't presume anything. But yeah.
I did want to get back to one thing that you had said, which I found very interesting. I found the whole conversation interesting, but what is Estonia doing that's so great?
They've really invented, in a way, e-government. So the way in which you interact with government at almost every level, whether it's permits, whether it is licenses, whether it is the way in which your records are kept, is like really automated. The data is integrated. So yeah, it's people don't know about it, but they have really led the way in terms of, call it, e-government.
And is there an opportunity in New York to do that? Do you think that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you're dealing with old systems, and you know, getting old systems to talk to each other requires both will and technology. But of course, it could be done.
Last thing, I was so interested. You mentioned the heating and cooling system that could be installed because of. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it uses sensors in buildings that Class B in individual spaces. And it sends either signals automatically or notifications to building managers about how you can adjust, whether it's heat, HVAC, windows, other things, how you shift times for doing certain things. And it's just over time, it learns. That's the artificial intelligence part of it, and therefore becomes more and more automatic.
Well,
it's called MESA, MESA.
It's you know, that is going to be one of the most sought after technologies, it seems to me, just with Local Law 97 coming into effect.
Yeah, again, I think the pressure on landlords to both from a cost perspective, from a tenant satisfaction perspective and from a regulatory perspective to think more significantly about the way they operate their buildings. That pressure is going to grow. Now, larger buildings, Class A buildings, have building management systems that are pretty sophisticated, but the vast majority of buildings are not Class A buildings. They're Class B and C buildings. And so I think everybody's going to have to focus on this.
For sure. Well, Dan, we're just about out of time, but I did want to give you the last word. Is there a sign off that you would like to leave us with?
Well, I think it's where we started. I think the new model of growth is inclusive growth, where we got to grow. Cities can only grow or they die, but we recognize that the political and social pressures against the way we've grown in the past are changing that. And therefore, we got to think much more holistically about the way we grow. The good news is we've got new approaches. We've got a greater understanding of why we need to do that. And hopefully what will emerge from this is smarter, fairer, better cities.
Smarter, fairer, better. That's a good mantra to leave it on. Dan Doctoroff, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Max.
And I would like to also thank all of our guests and for all of you for joining us on our inaugural Ignite series. I would like to again thank today's program sponsors, Cadre, Canberra Creek, Sherry, Eden Health, Fried Frank, HQO, International Well Building Institute, Placer.ai, STO Building Group, as well as today's association partners, GNYCUC, NYC Builds Bio Plus, and Women in PropTech. Thank you again, and please mark your calendars for our 2021 fall events. We have an exciting lineup of programs on the calendar, including our 14th annual Power Gala, our Sustainability Forum, Miami Future Forward Leadership Summit, and the State of Leasing just around the corner in September and October. You can visit our website at commercialobserver.com/events for more details on upcoming events and power briefings. We have also dropped this direct link in the Zoom chat in your control panel, and have a great afternoon and a wonderful summer.